So now to get to the webinar and the topic that we'll be discussing, I am very excited to be talking about this because I have lived it. I know being on the side of feeling lonely, I know what it's like to have the wrong people, and I know what it's like to have the right people. And all of those experiences come with so much intense, just loaded emotions in general. So I'm just really happy to be able to be talking about this after going through so much of it myself. So let's get started. Okay. So let's just talk about relationships in general. So how do relationships relate to wellness? So we have since found through research and just like watching the evidence over centuries of us as social beings, social creatures, that relationships are one of the biggest predictors of life satisfaction. So, sorry, I just want to make sure. Okay, excellent. So it's one of the biggest predictors, and sometimes people underestimate that because we think of health, we think of money, we think of all of these other factors, but over and over again, it comes down to our relationships. And it's not just in the terms of, feeling joy or positive mental health. There's actually physical health impacts as well. So first, on the sides of just what we would normally think of about relationships, about wellness, about happiness, about connection, things like that. So Martin Seligman is a positive psychologist. He is the leader in this field. And what positive psychology is, it is such a beautiful thing. It is literally it is the study of the good life. And that is what that whole field is devoted to. What makes us happy? What supports us as people and individuals? And what just, again, gives us a good life, which I love that. I'm so passionate about that. And for so long, psychology was about the negatives and about sickness and all of these different things. So it's a really, really interesting field. And his PERMA theory, which is essentially it's an acronym to represent the predictors of life satisfaction. So PERMA stands for positive emotions, relationships, meaning, and achievements. So those have been found through his studies to be the greatest impacts on our day-to-day wellness. So obviously relationships, it's right in the middle there. And not only is it clearly important, when you think about it, it's impacting at least two of the other things in that important acronym. So your relationships, whether they're good or bad, are going to have an effect on whether or not you have positive emotions. Meaning, a lot of us can find so much meaning in our relationships and in other people. So it really has a big role to play. Another study is a Harvard study that was published in 2012. And interestingly enough, it is the longest study that has ever been conducted. Don't quote me on it. It's 1937, I think, was when it started, when they started following participants. If it wasn't, it was definitely the 1930s, but I'm pretty sure it was 1937. So they started following people to find out what are the greatest predictors of well-being and how those predictors impacted mortality. So they were starting from scratch. We didn't have any studies like that before. So it wasn't that they had a hypothesis that, oh, maybe it is relationships. So they looked at that. They looked at everything. They looked at health. They looked at income. They looked at relationships. They looked at mindset, anything you could think of that might have an impact on our health and well-being. And what they found at the end of the study is that relationships had the greatest impact on our long-term wellness and long-term health. So I think that's a really interesting study because it's looking at everything. And I do want to mention that based on where the study was and when it started, I can't be certain that it was considering socioeconomic factors, so like wealth and race and status in that sense, in class, because it wasn't necessarily a big focus yet at that point. We weren't necessarily sure how those things impacted. Now we do have a better sense, and I would be pretty confident in saying that it wasn't considered, and it's really important that we do consider those things. However, I think for our purposes, what we're discussing, it is still very relevant and very meaningful, because they looked at so many things, and relationships was above all. So kind of some more information coming from Harvard as well, just other little studies that came out of that original study. We start looking at the actual physical health implications of relationships and positive relationships. So what we were just talking about, that is majorly about joy, about happiness, the things we normally think of when we think about our friends, our family, our partners. So those are kind of the more obvious impacts. But there's also actually, really interestingly, major health implications in our relationships. And the main source of that comes to stress reduction and stress symptoms. So having positive relationships is going to help our feelings of stress and manage our stress. And we know that there are so many diseases and conditions that come out of our stress levels. So, a study cited in a Harvard Medical School journal found that positive relationships have as strong of an impact on health outcomes and longevity as good nutrition, sleep, and not smoking. So in casual terms, basically what that means, like, think about everything you're taught in school. Smoking is bad for you. You need good sleep. You need good nutrition, like healthy eating, the food pyramid, all of those things. We hear that about having good health for the long term. But what we found after studying people across a lifetime and looking at mortality rates and conditions in their life, we find that it has as significant as an impact as all of those like scary things that we've heard about in the past. But we're not necessarily taught to put our relationships on that high of a pedestal. We don't necessarily think about how important our relationships really are for our health. And things that it impacts are things like, so the stress hormone cortisol can be really hard on our body in excess. It can contribute to heart disease. It can contribute to anxiety and depression or other mental illnesses. Just a bunch of bad stuff you don't want. It contributes to immune function. If we have too much of it, our immune systems drop, and I have some more information about that afterwards. But essentially the point is, relationships impact us so much more than we necessarily think. So let's flip the coin here. So now that I've talked about how lovely it is and to have good people and to have great relationships, how good it is for our health, all these little things, let's talk about the other side of the coin, which is loneliness. And this is a time that I would love for you guys to kind of get involved and maybe talk about in the chat section, just like what this word means to you when you're particularly feeling lonely or anything like that. So I guess just to get that going and to give you guys some context where I'm coming from, I absolutely know what it's like to feel lonely. And I acknowledge that I might be the youngest person right now in this audience. I'm only 20 years old, but I will say that being in high school gave me a full dose of loneliness and how difficult it really can be. So just like a really quick backstory, I've always been very much like an old soul, and I just really felt just disconnected from the people around me because everyone was the way normal high schoolers are. And I didn't have any issues with them being that way. And sorry, I saw somebody's voice popping up, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't need any correction or anything. Yeah, so I just felt like I didn't relate to anyone, and it made me feel really lonely because everyone else was doing everything that was fun for that time in our life. And I wished that I could find those things fun, but I just couldn't. And there weren't people around me that shared my interests, and it was a really lonely time. And the worst part of it was, which is why I want to have this discussion about loneliness is not just being alone. And that's how we think of it a lot. Like, oh, if you don't have people around you, or if you don't have close relationships right now, you must be lonely. But that's not all loneliness is. Loneliness is about connection. It's not about people around you. It's not about quantity or anything like that. The worst kind of loneliness is being lonely with people because you just don't feel connected to them. So that's why I want to have this discussion, because first of all, loneliness is hard. It hurts. It just makes you feel stuck, and it just adds like a certain level of boredom to your life, I would say, because you just want people that love the things you love and think the way you think. So I just want to have this discussion to reframe how you're thinking about loneliness and to consider, could I be lonely in the relationships I have right now? And that's what we're gonna keep talking about now. So, relationships versus loneliness. We just talked about how important and how beneficial relationships are. So the opposite must be, okay, sorry, just making sure we don't need anything. So yeah, so good health versus bad health, relationships versus loneliness. If I'm going on and on about how important relationships are and how much they impact your health, it must mean that being without relationships is bad and being with relationships is good. So is it that simple? If I'm asking the question, if it's that simple, the answer is probably no. It is absolutely not that simple. So the study that I was talking about before, that was listing like the cigarettes and the nutrition and all of those things, talked about the fact that it is not just relationships. It's not just about people being around us. The same study reported that midlife women in satisfying long-term relationships had lower cardiovascular risks than women in unsatisfying relationships. They also found a link between negative interactions with family and friends with poorer health. They found reduced immunity in couples during marital spats, so marital issues. And those over 75 with satisfying contact with relatives and friends had the lowest risk of dementia. And then one last study is that they found that being in an unhappy relationship has more health detriments than being single. These are really important facts. So why are we talking about that? Because it seems like, if relationships and having people has all these health benefits, then I'll just surround myself with people and that's that. It's not that simple. Who you have matters. It's not just about having people. And that's really a hard pill to swallow. Because like I've written here, many of us at one point or another have just made it work with who's available, because being alone is hard and feeling lonely is difficult. And even when you're not feeling totally connected with the people around you, it feels like you can just be there and be around them and you won't notice that you feel lonely because there are people here, and you can just kind of put your blinders on and pretend. But and the studies we were talking about before about unsatisfying relationships, they weren't relationships with domestic violence, they were, or infidelity or anything like that. They were just genuine relationships that were unsatisfying for whatever reason. Maybe there's regular conflict, maybe you don't have too many things in common with the extra person, like whatever it is, for some reason it was unsatisfying. And we're not just talking about romantic partners. Yes, a lot of the studies available do talk about partners, but that's more for convenience sake than anything else. And there are some, I did cite some before, that are just people in general. But yeah, it's just genuinely unsatisfactory relationships can have just as much as an impact. So all those things we were talking about, all of those benefits, all of those really cool facts, and also just things with about the joy and the life satisfaction, all of those things are immediately taken away when the relationships are not positive and when they don't feel good. And that is the highlight of this talk. And I hope that's what you'll take away, because it is so much easier when you're feeling lonely to just surround yourself with people, any people. So this is why we're moving on to people versus your people. So these make it work people. This is your safety net. And these safety nets protect us from that horrible feeling of loneliness, from having to have hard conversations. It's really uncomfortable to say to people you've hung out with for maybe a long time, you know, this isn't really working for me. I don't feel at home here. That's very uncomfortable. It protects us from trying to find new people. Making friends is hard, especially as an adult. We're not in kindergarten anymore. We're not forced into the same room for hours on end and just making friends left and right. It's hard, and these safety nets keep us from having to go out and do that. Or a combination of all three, and likely it is a combination of all three. So if these things are so uncomfortable, and this net is a safety net, it's a place where we're comfortable, and that safety net isn't necessarily full of people that are bad people or people that are unkind to you. They're just people that you know it's not right. And this is a very particular example that only applies to certain phases of life, but I think that you can get something out of it. So like I said, I've been through having the wrong people, then to having no people, and then to having the right people. So when I had the wrong people, the most shocking moment was when I looked around this group of really great girls that I had been friends with for 5, 6, 7 years, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to talk to any of you the day after graduation. And it wasn't that I didn't like them as people. It wasn't that they weren't kind. I just didn't feel at home there. I didn't feel completely relaxed to be myself. I didn't necessarily care about what they were talking about. And it's not that they were talking about things that were silly or dumb. It wasn't the things that I cared about. And it's that moment of I guess just realizing if we weren't forced into the same space, this would not be a relationship we would uphold. That's kind of the general beyond high school aspect of things. And I think when you have that moment, that's when you realize, oh man, what am I doing here? So even though that safety net might save you from a lot of discomfort, it's not right. And I don't mean morally wrong. I just mean you don't feel right there. So why should we force ourselves into this uncomfortable place, into this feeling alone, when nobody wants to feel that way? Nobody wants to have the hard conversations. Because the reason why is that feeling loneliness while surrounded by people is horrible. It is the worst feeling ever. And I know I'm seriously slowing down to emphasize this, but I cannot express the way that feeling has broken my heart. Like, I remember one time, again, high school references, and I apologize for that, but I'm sure you can apply it to whatever your world is like right now. But I remember sitting at the cafeteria table with a certain group of people for an hour. While I was there, I had a totally fine time. I was laughing, I was chatting, I was contributing. But the walk from that cafeteria table to my 5th period class was the saddest walk of my life every single day, because I left there and I felt no impact from the people I was with. I felt no sense of connection to them. And that would come to light as soon as I would walk away and feel nothing. And that hurt, because I realized that I had so many people around me and so many people that knew me, but I was still completely lonely because I was lacking the connection. And then the other reason we push ourselves outside of that place is just to have the chance to find your people. I'm not going to say that loneliness is easy to deal with, but there's a difference between something being difficult and something being bad. I believe so truly that everyone goes through a moment in their life, like a time period in their life, when they genuinely don't have anyone. They don't have close friends, or they don't have a close partner. I think from what I've witnessed of the people around me, I think we all have that time. And it is bad, it sucks, it hurts, but it helps you to realize what you really want. And if you're stuck in that safety net and you're just so worried about feeling alone that you would rather have anyone, then you're not giving yourself that sense of need to go find those people, because you're in your comfort zone. You don't want to go outside of it because it's going to be a hard process, but that just keeps you in that state of it's not right for longer. So, so your people, who are they? How do you get them, and how do you know that you have? So let's start with who are they? Who your people are depends on who you are. I love all things health and wellness, and I will say that I believe at the core of all healthy behaviors is self-knowledge. You need to have a good, true, certain understanding of yourself to be able to meet your needs appropriately, because if you don't know what you need, there's no way to get it. So I've put together some questions that will help you. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but it's just to start getting you thinking of the certain things that you should be looking for when exploring who might be your people and what kind of people are those people. I just want to check the chat really quick to make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, great. All right. So your kind of people self-exploration question. So this is the first step. You need to know what kind of person you're looking for before you can find them. And let me reiterate in case it hasn't been clear, we're not talking about romantic relationships. We're talking about relationships, period. Friends, family, partners, anything. Like, I don't know that I believe in soulmates in the sense of that universe way. That's a whole other conversation. But I believe that I have people that I'm meant to be with and meant to be close to in my life, which is soulmates is kind of the closest explanation to that. So you have to think about who you are in order to pick those people out. So I just want to go through this list really quickly, just because some of them might not be super clear. So the first question is pretty much the first question I apply to anything and everything. So are you introverted or are you extroverted? To me, these two personality types impacts everything you do. So really quickly, in case you're not familiar with these terms, an introvert is someone that gets energy from being alone or being with very small people, like small groups of people. And extroverts get their energy from interacting with people in high energy situations. So the best way to think about it, to put it in real life terms, imagine you come home from a really long day and you just want to zone out, just want to feel better, just want to forget about the day and recuperate. Would you rather go out with a big group of friends, maybe go to like a bar or a restaurant somewhere that's very high energy? Or would you rather go home either by yourself or with a group of friends with maybe a book or a movie, something much slower paced to be able to recharge? So that's kind of how you can think of that distinction. It's where do you take energy from? And the reason this is so important in this realm of thinking of who your kind of people might be is if you're an introvert, you might feel drained or exhausted by certain kinds of people. If you're an extrovert, other kinds of people may not move quickly enough for you and may not offer you enough stimulation. So it's a really important thing to think about. What is your ideal social setting? So what I mean by this is just imagine a fun night, a night that just feels good, you feel relaxed. What does that look like for you? And the thing about finding your people is we're not settling. We're getting the people that suit us and that feel good to us. So when I say, what is your ideal social setting? Be honest, be true, because if that's yours, it's somebody else's. So it's kind of hard for me to think outside of my 20-year-old brain, but one side of the spectrum would be like going to parties or going to bars, going to clubs, like those high energy situations where you get to see a lot of people, you get to dance, you get to, I'm very introverted, so it's super hard for me to come up with these examples, but I think you get the point. Or my personal example of my absolute favorite thing to do in social settings is with a small, close-knit group of people that I genuinely love, and playing board games and having a game night. That is by far my absolute favorite social setting. So what that tells me is I want to find people that are going to be just as excited by a night like that as I am. What activities give you the greatest sense of connection, either by yourself or with others? Maybe reading a book, maybe, again, extroverted examples, but I think you get the point. What kind of people are interesting to you? So I think that sometimes there are people that naturally stand out to us. So an example for me personally is I find people that are really passionate, super interesting, and I love to hear about whatever gets people excited, no matter how little I care about it. I just love seeing that kind of fire in people. And that is those are the kinds of people that are interesting to me. And by knowing that, that's something I can look out for. Other examples are like things on the surface. I know that I'm drawn to people that look a certain way. I go to St. Thomas and I always notice when people are particularly like artistic looking. And of course you can't judge a book by this cover. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to make your decisions based solely on these things. It's more just getting to know yourself and getting to know what you're looking for. So just kind of being aware of that. What are values that you hold without exception? So that's deal breakers, basically. So you don't have to be the exact same as the people that are your people, and you don't need to have the exact same opinions and outlooks and all of that, but there might be some deal breakers to you. For instance, I personally couldn't have someone being my person that maybe drinks and drives. Like that is a deal breaker for me because that is a value that I hold without exception. So it's important to be aware of those things. Who and what energy are you naturally drawn to? So example, I'm really drawn to people who are optimistic and kind of radiate that. What are your passions? Pretty straightforward. What are your hobbies? Do you connect more with people that are younger, the same age, or older than you? That I think is especially important if you are a younger person like myself. I know that I tend to connect with older people, but it's kind of just thinking about what age you are at heart. Like some people are young at heart, and maybe that's going to make your grandchildren your people, things like that. This one sounds really funny, and I really hate using this word in a serious sense, but I think it's worthwhile. What kind of vibe do you generally project? So I know that sounds so silly, but just hear me out. You want to attract the people that you want to be. So I love that I'm an optimistic person. It's gonna kind of cramp my style a little bit if someone is really negative. Like that's just not the vibe or the energy that I'm trying to project, and I want to find someone that has a similar kind of energy. Like another thing, I'm very relaxed. I don't respond well to people that are really like tightly strung, and some people are type A personalities. They like order, they like rules, they like all of those kinds of things, but I really don't respond well to that. Or another kind, like I am very non-confrontational. So people that are able to be kind of aggressive and get excited in ways, even not mean-spirited, but some people when they get worked up about things, they sound and appear confrontational and aggressive, even though that's not the intention. Some people would really thrive off of that. Some people love challenge and love, like I can think of if people love having like debates and things like that, that would work really well for them, but I really don't like that. So that's kind of what that question is. And then just really quick, just some yes or no's to kind of give you a sense of where you want to find people that are to a degree similar to you. So that's kind of what these questions are. So I'm not going to go into them, but if you want this page to kind of keep, then absolutely, I would be more than happy to send that out in an email to anyone. So just put that in the chat. But yeah, those are just some like guiding questions to get you thinking and to get you understanding that to be able to find your people, you need to know what you're looking for. And you might think, okay, yeah, I know all these things, like this is me, and it's in the back of my head. But it's not necessarily about having it in the back of your mind. It's about taking time to sit down and really acknowledge all of these things. You might not have to look very hard, but bringing it to the forefront of your attention is going to say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And I think that's really powerful. All right. Oh, sorry, there we go. Okay, next, how do I find them? Talk to everyone. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this word, but there's no other way. Friendship making 101 is just making an ass of yourself. You need to talk to anyone and everyone, and it is exhausting. Like introvert, extrovert, whatever. You have to talk to everyone, because otherwise, how are you going to meet people? So examples of that, I know this because that was my first year at university. I knew leaving high school, I said, okay, I'm ready. I need to find my people. And I cycled through a few groups over and over again, talking to people, realizing it wasn't for me. And then I had to do the same thing the next day, talk to some other people. It's so hard. I'm not denying that. It's so much easier said than done, but it is absolutely crucial. Talk openly about your interests. So in interactions that are kind of like small talk or whatever, kind of like sprinkle those things in. Like if someone asks you how your weekend was at work, for example, and you say, oh, it was really good. I was out on the boat and doing this, this, and this. That's giving the opportunity for people to say, oh, I really love that. Like I do that too. And that leads me to my next point, which is to put yourself out there. So if you're speaking openly about your interests and someone expresses the same interest, put yourself out there and create an opportunity to get to know that person better. And what better way than by sharing a common interest? Again, so much easier said than done. You really have to commit to this process, and you really need to find a certain sense of confidence. But really, the best case scenario is you find someone that's going to become one of your people, or you don't, and you don't really talk to them again. So try to find it in you to put yourself out there. Just go. So what I mean by that, slightly in a different way, a lot of us think, oh, I would really like to try this. I would really like to go to this, but I don't have anyone to go with. Just go. That's how you meet people that are interested in the same things you are. So this is kind of like the top down of the last point, which was more bottom up. So for instance, I really like poetry, and not everyone does because it's kind of dorky, but there's a cafe downtown that they do open mic nights. For me, I would like to go to that, but I don't necessarily have someone to share it with. But if I just get up and just go, I'm going to find a room of people to share it with. And this is arguably, next to talking to everyone, the most important point. Know what you want, which we just did, and don't compromise. If you're truly making the choice that you don't want to live in this safety net anymore, you don't want to be around people that just don't feel good and feel right to you, don't compromise. I swear there are people that will feel good for you, and don't compromise on your values and what you're looking for just in order to have people, because we've already talked about that. You're going to lose all of those benefits if the people aren't necessarily right for you. So know what you want and absolutely stick to it. Otherwise, everything you just did, talk to everyone, talk openly, put yourself out there, that's all uncomfortable and it's going to be a waste. So that's another way to think about it. Oh, okay, sorry, this is not the right slide. So the next thing I want to do really quickly is, so we did who are they, how do I find them, and now we're going to go over really quickly, how do you know once you found them. So again, if anyone's interested in this, I'd be more than happy to share it with you. But just a quick little flow chart that I put together. I think it's kind of clear what the point is, so you don't need to see the whole thing the whole time, but if you answer no to any of them, they're not your people. So it gets progressively a little pickier, a little bit more specific, but it's just a helpful kind of guide. So starting with as simple as, are they easy to talk to? There are people that it's just, you're putting effort into just having a conversation with them. Other people will probably, no problem, they have a point of relation in some way and it's easy. If that's not the case, they're not your people. Are there things you can do together? This one's really important and I think underestimated. A quick backstory from me is my first boyfriend, which again, I was like 16, so not anything super serious. But the reason why we got along so well is because we could chat for hours. We could talk about absolutely anything. The problem was, after being together for 2 years, when there wasn't much left to talk about, we were at a loss. We had nothing to do together because we did not like anything the same. So yeah, it's awesome to find people that you can just talk and talk and talk with. But this is meant to be a long-lasting thing, and eventually it's not going to roll off the tongue so easily. And that's when it's really important to have something to fall back on that you can do together. Do they cheer you on? That one's pretty straightforward. So do they support you? Are they excited for you when you get good news, or are they jealous? Do they get excited over what you're excited for, even if it means nothing to them? Do they respect your differences and boundaries? I just want to let you guys know that someone put their camera on, which is totally fine. Okay, there we go. I just wanted to make sure you knew it was on. Okay, so do they respect your differences and boundaries? This one's really important. So an example of that is, I, for one, I really don't like to drink or anything else, or go to parties. It's just not my scene. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I have tons of friends that love that. But the difference is, they're not going to try to force me to go. They're not going to make me feel bad that that's not fun for me. Whereas when I was in high school, I did feel bad that I didn't like those things because I wasn't around the right people, and the people around me didn't respect that. That just wasn't for me. I just didn't like it. So from there, do you feel you can be yourself around them? Can you be open with them? So is it easy to just say, for example, like if you don't feel like hanging out that day, do you feel like absurd pressure to go anyway? Or for instance, my mom's very extroverted. She wants to talk to me multiple times a day, every day. And sometimes I just have to say, look, Mom, I've had a really tiring day and I just need to wind down. And I can just be open and say that without the fear of kind of the repercussions. How do you feel before and after seeing them? So before, are you dreading it? Are you feeling reluctant? Do you have to cheer yourself up? When you leave, are you feeling exhausted and drained, like it was so much effort to be around this person? And how do you feel after seeing them? Do you feel energized? Do you feel like they've added something to your life and to your day and your experience? And the very last one is, does it feel natural? They can check every other box, but if it doesn't just feel natural and easy and right and that sense of connection, they're just not your people. And that's okay. Like, you can like all kinds of people and have people's influence in your life. But what we're talking about is those few strong, really tight relationships that you build your experience around. And those kinds of things need to feel natural and second nature. And that's where that sense of connection comes from. And now to end off, which is, by the way, a really good time if you do have any questions to start dropping them in the Q&A, because I'm just about done here. But the last thing to talk about is, okay, what now? What do I do until then? You can say, oh yeah, that's all well and good. Claire, you found your people, you know how good these things feel. That's great, you're telling me to, but I'm still lonely. Absolutely. None of this has been me saying, oh, just be lonely, just be alone for a while and it will get better, and that's fine. Because loneliness is so painful. It is so difficult. So just some tips to get you kind of from point A to point B is, one, focus on you. So when I personally was going through this journey, I thought of it in the sense of, okay, there's one person in my life that I will spend the absolute most time with, and that person is me. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what excites me, what do I love to do, what gives me energy, and those were the things that I was really focusing on because I lacked the people around me to bring those things to me. So I had to bring them to myself. And it's a good time for self-discovery and self-growth. And if you're here with me today, you're likely interested in self-growth and making your life better. So it's a good time for that. Don't wait for others to take part. Like I said before, sometimes there's things that we're like, oh, I really want to do that, but I don't have anyone to go with or share it with. Don't wait. If you know you love something and you want to do something, just go do it. Find other outlets. So similar to the last two, kind of diverting your attention. So if there's things that you love that you don't necessarily need people for, do those things as much as possible because it's going to give you more of a sense of doing things and of engagement, which that sense of engagement is really one of the big things that we are getting from our relationship. So just find other outlets for that lack of connection or engagement. Get connection wherever you can. So if you're truly feeling alone, it's really difficult because we're social animals. That's how we function. Get connection wherever you can. So I always, when I'm speaking to a customer service person or if I'm calling to make an appointment, I say, hey, how are you? And they say, oh, good, how are you? And like, that seems so small, but it always lifts me up a little bit because I feel connected to that person in that moment. So it can be a really good little hack for when you're feeling kind of lonely and missing that sense of human connection and companionship is just anyone you're interacting with, be friendly, welcome those kinds of experiences. And lastly, work on finding your people. We know that when something feels uncomfortable, even if we can't change the situation, it helps to work on the situation. So you might say, okay, I'm feeling really lonely and that's really hard, but at least I'm doing something about it. And just that little sense of contribution and effort is going to help you through this time of loneliness, and hopefully it will cut it short a little bit because you're consciously working on getting to where you want to be. So you may have gone through the wrong people, and so you distance yourself. Now you have no one. It's time to work towards finding those people, not compromising, and getting all of those true benefits that we talked about having strong, positive relationships. I think that's all I have to say. Reminder to stick around because we'll do a survey just talking about if you liked this, and if you have any questions, I would love to chat. You can just drop them in the Q&A there, but if not, then yeah, I think that's all I have to say.